from the UK to Zimbabwe. We're also celebrating a very important day, which I hope you are thinking a little bit differently about. I know sometimes the calendar feels like it's inundated with so many commemorations, some which you probably cannot articulate if you had to, but you just know that they're part of that day. I'm hoping today we can articulate a little bit more the importance of the Day of the Girl Child. And this year, the theme, if you've noticed throughout the year, we've been tapping into themes to do with the digital and technology space. If you remember Women's Day as well, we were looking at how technology and the digital era is something that we need to harness. And for us as the girl child, this is no exception. If you remember during COVID-19, and I promise you, if you lived through that time, you, especially if you're a student, you knew how difficult it was to get your lessons in, to be able to study. And research provided that the girl child was most affected by COVID-19. It's never the boy child, right, in most cases. So you can imagine the girl child has, in most cases, been affected by the lack of innovation, or whenever there's some sort of disturbance in the environment, there is an effect that comes in to the girl child. So every year, we as Zimbabwe join hands with the rest of the world, commemorating the International Day of the Girl Child. And as I've said, the theme is looking at digital generation, our generation. So as we're talking about that, he is the ambassador that's joined our community back home, as I said, and to explain why we'd say he's back home. His name is Pete Vowels, and he's taking over from Her Excellency, if you remember, Melanie Robinson, who also was here some time ago. And I read a tweet, and she was sad to leave our country, but she was also equally excited because she knew the person who was taking over from her was absolutely competent. Let me welcome you, Your Excellency, Ambassador Pete. Good morning and welcome to Capital.
Mangwarani mamukase.
Aiwa tamuka mamuka.
Tamuka.
So, this is you coming back to the country as an ambassador, but we have heard and learned that you were here in the early 90s, you were teaching. A few years later, you then took on a different role where you were working with development, and you've also then gone and traveled the world in different countries doing developmental work on an international scale. So this to you is no strange happening for you, Pete.
This is yeah, you're absolutely right. I spent about 5 years here in the 1990s and have basically been trying to come back to Zimbabwe ever since. I was really fortunate enough to work in rural Mudzi and then later live in Marewa, in the Growth Point in Marewa. I had a fantastic time in Marewa and in Mudzi. I really enjoyed rural and kind of Growth Point life. Learned a lot. I think worked really hard and learned a lot about myself, and hopefully made some kind of impact as a teacher and subsequently in Marewa. But I think also I just had such a fantastic time getting to know Zimbabweans, getting to know the country. Dai Tandara Nation, Wari Zangu. The weekends used to so living in Marewa Growth Point, or weekends going to the dam or playing football, or going to the bottle store playing slug, daita, gotch, learning to drink chibuku in the beer hall.
Really?
All the things that kind of make rural and Growth Point life. Actually also really loved when at the end of the month when we got paid. I was actually employed by the Zimbabwe Ministry of Education, so we got paid at the end of the month, going to a Marewa hotel or down to coming to Harare to see live music. So very much the era at the time, Lena Jakarta, Ola Mutukudzi. So found a complete love of Singura music.
Yeah.
I'm finding it a bit hard now to keep up with Zim dancehall, but certainly a fantastic experience living in Zimbabwe at the time.
Yeah. What keeps standing out to us, Pete, is how you clearly have always had love not only for education, but I'd imagine as a teacher you were also fond of the girl child.
Absolutely. I mean, I think what was really amazing was working with young people in rural Zimbabwe, Mashonaland East, and particularly young women, just watching and seeing, observing the kind of commitment, the dedication, sometimes against all odds. And I particularly remember a young woman who, sadly, I lost contact with. I was the days before Facebook and WhatsApp, so mobile phones. But a young woman called Tapiwa who, she'd had a really difficult situation. Her mother had passed. She had 3 younger sisters, but her commitment to education, to getting herself and her sister to school, despite the kind of difficulties, and I think I learned so much as a young, at the start of my career and as a young man, just about, not only about hard work and dedication, but if I'm really honest, just about awareness of my own privilege. I had a pretty easy setup of going to school in the UK, coming and then living and working in rural Zimbabwe. Just that's a sense of how difficult, but how well young women are doing in spite of the circumstances back then.
It's 20 minutes after 9. Good morning and welcome to The Crunch. We're spending some time this morning welcoming and also trying to pick his brain a little bit. He is the new ambassador from the UK to Zimbabwe. Pete is in the building, Pete Vowels. And we are just touching base with him about, him having been in the country before, him being back. And as we are celebrating with the rest of the world today, the International Day of the Girl Child, we are pursuing the theme, looking at digital generation, our generation. Now, in Shona, Pete, we say Mushamkats, which pretty much means or summarizes the role women play in our society, in keeping the home stable, in looking after everybody. And I'd imagine for you as an individual, having experienced girls across different countries, different cultures, I'd imagine somehow that you as a person have a desire perhaps to protect the girl child?
I think absolutely, and I think I guess it starts with education, doesn't it? And you probably don't need to say that in Zimbabwe. Zimbabweans probably more so than any nationality in the world recognise the importance of education. I think there's a phrase, "Ukazidzitsa musikana wadzidzitsa udzi," as you say, so the real kind of baseline importance of getting a girl from school, and that's the foundation, isn't it? 12 years of quality education. We know globally that a child whose mother can read is 50% more likely to live beyond the age of 5, is 50% more likely to be immunised, and twice as likely to go to school herself. So just the impact, and you see this around the world, and you see this obviously in Zimbabwe, where Zimbabweans have been so passionate about it. I think more than that, of course, there's other areas you need to protect and to sort of promote the girl child. Particularly about having role models, and I think really looking for role models in the media, such as yourself, Balaki, role models in the arts, in some fantastic women writers in Zimbabwe, Titi Dangaremba or Valerie Tagwere, great examples of role models. Even now, just watching football after the Women's World Cup and the sort of global rise of passion for women's football. I think today Zimbabwe women are playing Botswana in the Southern Africa Cup. So again, just looking for role models, demonstrating that so girls can grow up seeing themselves in leadership roles in society. I think finally, just adding the importance of helping girls kind of bring their voice, stand up for what they believe in. And I've really, I was at the Shoko Festival a couple of weeks ago and really just loved the two winners of the sort of mashup contest, Nyasha C and Banshee, two young women sort of standing up, singing for the things they care about, the things that matter to them. I think that's really important for young girls in Zimbabwe, looking up and seeing young women being able to stand up for the social, political issues that affect them.
So funny story, Pete. I was the only girl, I was my dad's only girl for 13 years. And then, that story ended up 13 years. But one thing that my dad always loves to share with me is a story of when I was a toddler. And my parents were young at that time. And I think he was an apprentice. He was apprenticing to be an engineer. And he always tells a story of how he found me in dirty diapers because the house help had gone next door. And she was eating maputi with the neighbor. And he says he fired her, he changed my diaper, he picked me up and went to the school my mom was teaching at that time. And he went to see the headmaster. I said, listen, I need my wife to come home and I found the baby alone. And he tells the story with pride. I'm like, Dad, you need to stop telling people about dirty diapers. but you were also a father. And I'd imagine once you became a dad to a beautiful girl, it also changes the way you see women. It changes the way you hope for young girls, including your daughter.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got a 15-year-old daughter, Matilda, who's 15 but going on 19. And that's a interesting thing as a dad to watch a young woman growing up and becoming an adult. And I chatted to her last night, saying I was coming onto the Capital Talk, and what does she think I should say? What does she think was important? And I think for her, saying that she just doesn't see barriers doesn't see barriers. She can do anything, and that's really fantastic to watch and to observe, compared to, say, my mother, who really, her options in growing up in the 50s in Britain was, either become a housewife or to become a sort of secretarial college, maybe. But actually, my daughter feeling that there's no barriers. I think for her, also seeing how she described it to me last night was her barrier is still seeing things as being sometimes a bit dominated, particularly in the sort of science and tech areas, being dominated by boys and men. And while there's no barriers, it's just felt like her confidence to step forward and to step into that space. And I think as a dad and as a man, that's really important for men to be allies, to kind of back young girls, back women, so that they can have the confidence to step in. And it's a bit of point about role models, but just that confidence to step up and take the opportunities that are there.
Yeah. Are you hopeful for the world that your daughter, because she's 15 now, 50 years from now, she'll be 30, 40 at some point, 60 at some point. Are you hopeful about the kind of world she's going to grow up in?
I'm really positive. I mean, things have changed. Still, there's a way to go. We can talk about that, but I am positive. Just that generational difference between my daughter growing up today and young Zimbabwean women growing up today compared to 30 years ago, to 60 years ago. I'm also quite hopeful because I've got a young boy as well, and I've got a 12-year-old son, and just watching him, how he respects his sister, how sensitive he was as she's sort of gone through puberty, but also just his respect for her and her friends and the way they interact. And I have to be honest, probably very different from how young boys of my generation, how we interacted with women 30, 40 years ago. So I'm hopeful that attitudes are changing. Lots to do. I think it's important actually to say that this is not an issue talking about the girl child is not a Zimbabwe thing. It's a global priority. And in my country, in the UK, we still have significant challenges and inequalities and gender inequalities. So 9% difference in pay between men and women in the public sector in the UK today. That's outrageous. The women we talk about sort of technology, really find in the UK that women are underrepresented in science and technology and engineering type careers. And actually, really quite difficult. We have still in the UK, we have 1 in 4 women report some form of domestic abuse in their lifetime. So again, these are big, difficult statistics that we in the UK worry about. So obviously there are statistics in Zimbabwe too, but I think just making sure that it's clear that this is talking about the girl child, talking about kind of hope is a global issue that we should all be thinking about.
Yeah, you've raised some very important points, Ambassador. We as a country recently amended our Labour Act. In fact, normally this is Workers on Wednesday, and we're celebrating changes that have come into the Labour Act. Maternity leave now is no longer, something that as a woman you think, oh, I can only have 2 kids, and then after that it gets complicated. And I was like, no. Being a woman, let's celebrate that, and we amended the Labour Act. But what's also important, which you've highlighted, is how sometimes we like to talk a lot about the girl child, and we kind of forget to bring in the boy child into the conversation. I love how you said, my son also is thinking differently about the, girls and how we should be interacting with the girl child. I wanted to find out from you, what do you think as a family, community leaders, and even thought leaders, what could they be doing differently to make the world better, not just for the girls, but also for the boy child? I've heard enough people say, sometimes we are raising so many banners for the girl child, and we forget to bring in and to raise men who can equally stand next to this woman or this girl we're raising banners for.
I absolutely think that it's about attitudes on both sides, isn't it? And men and women. I think it's important just to think about where we've made a real success as well, and celebrate. Part of the International Day of the Girl is to recognise the challenges, but also to really recognise and celebrate success. And Zimbabwe has some fantastic, we talked about the labour laws, as you said. We talked about a year ago, Zimbabwe passed the Child Marriage Act. Again, progressive, important legislation. Zimbabwe has fantastic kind of equality of boys and girls in school, so primary and lower secondary school. Actually, female literacy in Zimbabwe is way higher than anywhere else in the region. Sort of 80%, 88% in Zimbabwe compared to others in the region. So some really good education stats for Zimbabwe, and it's good to celebrate those. And that's a real success for Zimbabwe. Of course, there are harder things too. We do know that in Zimbabwe, particularly the sort of upper ends of school, women start to drop out at sort of the A-level equivalent. 15 to 24-year-olds often, there's a difference there between girls who are in training or employment or at that age compared to boys. So we need to really kind of focus in on that. It's a great opportunity to give a shout out to some work we've been doing with the Apostolic Women's Empowerment Group and EcoNet, trying to really focus that group of young women in sort of 15 to 24, helping them with education, with training, employment training. So we've reached 21,000 girls, sort of, making sure there are targeted investments to support young women. Eco at the other end of the scale, celebrating, I met a group of young women off to scholarships to the UK to do fully funded master's degrees. Really exciting to meet them and just see, their hopes of going and studying, and some great stories. But one of them was, I don't know whether you've come across Wadzanai Kim Bwanya, who's written the sort of comic book Sipo the Engineer. Really nice.
I've seen her on the UK Facebook.
Right, really nice story, and she's, again, it's sort of challenging stereotypes and showing that women can have roles in science, tech, engineering. So I think it's, yes, we keep raising, talk about the challenges, but keep celebrating the real fantastic successes, and keep just promoting. Both, all of us have a role to do. The business case is clear. Those of you who are going to make very businessy about it, making sure that the whole of the population is engaged and able to work and contribute. The evidence is really clear too, what you need to do. So really it's just a question of kind of getting on doing it.
Yeah, it's really good to hear. We can't avoid hearing the sound of the teacher in you, hearing the voice of somebody who certainly is passionate about development work. We're hearing, and we're looking forward to spending hopefully the next 5 years with you, Ambassador, and seeing, how the UK and Zimbabwe can work together. Once again, we want to congratulate you. I was asking you, when are we going to Murewa to go together?
I'm very looking forward to it. Fara kuenda ku Murewa ku goch.
Oh, I love that. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm sure Kate will also help us in organizing that, and we can spend a day out in Murewa where you have been. Have you been there?
I haven't been back yet. No, so I'm looking forward to. I'm looking forward to getting around the country, but definitely love to go back to Mudzi and to Murewa for sure.
It is Capital 100.4 FM Harare Zapid. That was the voice of our new ambassador, who has been appointed by King Charles III from June, but he has landed this September, and we're going to be spending the next 5 years with him, and we look forward to seeing how we as a country, two countries, come together and build together, particularly celebrating the day of the girl child, how we can make the lives of our girls in Africa, in Zimbabwe, and beyond better for the future, but also in the digital age that is coming.